presented by allaccessretail.com. Welcome to Conversations on Retail. Join Mike Grain as he sits down with Matthew Andrews, Global Standards Director for GS1 US, to discuss the role of GS1 in retail supply chain initiatives. Let's get started.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be. Welcome back to another session of Conversations on Retail and the University of Arkansas Supply Chain Management Department. We're here today with Matt Andrews from GS1 organization. We're going to talk all things standards. And while that may seem like, why are we talking about standards? A lot of this is going to be wrapped around what are the emerging business cases, specifically about leveraging serialized data, RFID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, we're going to introduce Matt. Matt, go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Sure, of course. And thanks for having me on today, Mike. I've been a listener of this show actually for quite a while at this point, and I really do consider it a privilege to be considered as a guest on here today. So I really do appreciate it. My name is Matt Andrews. And at GS1 US, my title is Global Standards Director. And I serve as our primary subject matter expert for the EPCIS standard specifically. And basically what I do is I help our membership understand how to apply it in various applications, ranging from things like inventory management to using it to meet the traceability data needs for regulations and consumer engagement, things of that nature. Background originally is in electrical engineering, and for a while I was a solutions engineer for several years in the engineering, design, and data management software world. And I kind of got into the supply chain world somewhat randomly, actually, when I was recruited to work for a company that is a leading provider of RFID-based inventory management and loss prevention solutions for the apparel and footwear market. And so while I was there, I served as their primary US-based solution engineer for their inventory management software solutions that were deployed in the retail store environment. And I had the pleasure of helping some of North America's most recognizable names in retail understand the value of the software and how to deploy it across their stores for maximum success.
All right. You want to give them a shameless plug? Who are they? We're all chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
So only be a handful. I mean, there's only a handful that do that.
Right. Yeah. So NeedApp is what I used to work
NeedApp.
for.
Okay, yeah. Great company. Great company. I know that
absolutely.
It's really, really well. So, well, super. Well, let's just kind of start specifically. You already said your role is kind of on the EPCIS. To 90% of the audience, that's a bunch of letters strung together that mean no sense at all. So first, before we go into what is EPCIS, walk to us, because what the ironic part of this is I've been around for enough years that I was around with P&G when Walmart and I were trying to figure out RFID at the manufacturing level, to the distribution center level, to the store level, and tracking it all the way through the supply chain. And what we quickly found out was we had pretty good systems that tracked case level kinds of things throughout the supply chain. It was when it got into the store and it got opened up is when we lost track of it. So most of RFID for retail has been really focused on the store first, right? Yeah. What do I have? Where's it located? On-hand accuracy, et cetera. What's interesting now is we're now starting to say, well, wait a minute. Maybe we were right in 2003. Now it's time to look at how do we exchange that. So walk us through some of the business cases of why we need this thing called EPCIS, and then tell us a little bit about what it is.
Sure. Yeah. So I think maybe going to like kind of your first question, which was, thinking about it first, trying to implement it in the supply chain, but realizing that there was a lot of opportunity to be had in the store environment. We can kind of touch there and then maybe get into sort of what the value is of serialized data further up the chain. And I think, in my time deploying RFID inventory management solutions in the retail store environment specifically, one of the things that I learned during that time was that a lot of retailers and brands, really even to this day, the task of getting inventory accuracy levels up for stores to consistently high levels can really be a significant challenge. And what not having high confidence in the accuracy of your inventory levels in the store leads to is insufficient and inefficient practices like having high levels of safety stocks in the stores to ensure that you don't run out of product. And if you do run out of product because of low inventory accuracy, then you're really not able to potentially keep pace with the consumer demand for your offering. And so as retailers and brands were exploring, the benefits that RFID could provide their organizations, some began deploying those inventory management solutions that leverage RFID into stores. And really one of the most important things that allows you to do is cycle count the entire inventory of your store in those very small timeframes. And because of how fast you can do that with RFID, it enables you to perform those cycle counts on a monthly or even that weekly basis, and allows you to understand why differences exist between your ERP on hand number and a cycle counted number. And that type of resolution and investigation that promotes, you can get your inventory levels up to those high 90% ranges that we've seen today. And that means that you can start doing things like bringing your safety stock down levels to much smaller numbers than you might have had previously. And so those are some other benefits, like, for example, after the result of the cycle count, one of the things that can reveal is not just what's in the entire store, but what do you have out back versus what do you have out front. And if that cycle count happens to reveal that you have gaps on the sales floor, that you potentially have a lot of product in the back to fulfill, that gives you that visibility to know, I have product that's just sitting in the back of house that could be out there for the consumer to immediately see and touch and buy. And those are opportunities that can be unlocked with just even that weekly cycle count as well. So those are some of the big benefits that I think were realized really quite quickly in the store environment, sort of that low-hanging fruit for the RFID technology to be applied for. And then on a more technical note, I think it's interesting to think about, if you think about the technical lift of deploying an RFID-based solution into a retail store environment versus, say, like a distribution center, I think the technical lift is definitely something to consider. So to start interacting with RFID tag products in the store environment, the main things that you need are, for example, a mobile device with the inventory management software installed. You have a handheld scanner that's paired with the device that's capturing the product information out of the RFID tags that you're scanning. You basically have the way of synchronizing your on-hand numbers and your master data to the system as well. And then finally, you have a component that basically sends those finalized differences back to the ERP and updates the on-hand file. So I think once you have that formula applied to a few stores, it makes it so much easier to apply it to the rest of the stores within your organization. And then it also enables you to start turning on RFID to make other processes more efficient as well, like receiving, and then eventually maybe even integrating to the point of sale for serialized transactions at the point of sale. And so now I think in the modern environment, where we're seeing a lot of brands and retailers have very mature and established implementations of RFID solutions in the store environments, I think that gain that they've gotten now kind of enables them to start reconsidering deploying such solutions further up the chain. And by having that serialized data further up the chain, you're able to do things like improve the picking process, improve the packing process, and get more visibility into what you're actually shipping out, and verify incoming and receiving and things of that nature. But I think, just based on the nature of those implementations, the environments that you have to deploy the technology in, the greater number of affected processes that have to be considered for, changes and things like that, I think naturally just deploying it up into those environments just takes a little bit longer due to their scale and complexity. But I think really with the success of the implementations in the store environment, people are now starting to look at how can we get that same gain and that visibility further up the chain. And that just lends itself to a whole additional wealth of benefits, like being able to resolve claims better, getting accuracy on really virtually any process that involves the product movement throughout those environments.
Gotcha. Very, very helpful. Just a couple kind of builds on what you said. Number one, there are some retailers that actually RFID tag at the store level when they receive the merchandise. Mm-hmm. They can get those benefits that you just described. The rest of this podcast, they're not going to get the benefits. We're going to talk about where the assumption I'm going to make here is all of what the feature use cases we're talking about are what we call supplier source tags. So when Haynes put things off the manufacturing line and put it in a box destined to a retailer, it already has a serialized RFID tag on it, because that's the assumption. You can't do this if you're tagging at a store. Number two, we strongly suggest and advise, and I'm sure you would agree with this as well, there's no competitive advantage to a retailer coming up with their own way to serialize this data. Mm-hmm. Standards, just like the UPC is a specific format, the GS1 has EPC standards that we would strongly advise that everybody use, because otherwise you may find out, well, somebody bought something at one store, is trying to return it from another store, but you can't read it because you created a proprietary image. There's no competitive advantage to do that. So those are the two premises. But let's just talk about the next level, because a lot of what you talked about is in store, getting the audience right, getting the backroom product out of the back room onto the sales floor, measuring asset protection. Did I get everything I paid for? Did something get stolen from the store? Those are all use cases, but they're inside the retail box. Now we want to start talking about actually moving up the supply chain. From the DC to the store, from the supplier to the DC, et cetera. Now, you mentioned a term, and I think it's really a good time to unpack this. EPCIS. That sounds like a whole bunch of, I just want to buy a vowel, right? I don't know what all that is.
Right.
A long time. Tell us what that is at a high level. Tell us what that is, and why do I need that in terms of sharing data across the serialized data across the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I think we get into the standard itself, one of the things I usually like to do to kind of introduce the standard kind of at a higher level first is talk about just data sharing generally in the supply chain. And with the GS1 system of standards, we're really talking about three different types of data. So those three different types are master data, transaction data, and a newer form of data that people might not be too familiar with today, but it's something that's gaining certainly some traction, I think, is what is called visibility event data. And so with master data, we're talking about attribute information in relation to products and locations, so that as soon as a product comes into your ownership, you happen to know all the key attributes that you need to be able to manage it effectively in the supply chain. So the size of it, the weight of it, color, all that good stuff.
Stop you right there. A lot of people in the industry would hear they heard the word global data synchronization network, GDS. Yes. That's what that product happens to be, right? Synchronizing item information across the retail supply chain.
Correct. Yep, exactly. So when it comes to global dissemination of things like product attributes, exactly right. So the GDSN standard is the GS1 standard that is for exactly that global dissemination of product master data. Exactly. Perfect. Then when we're talking about transaction data, this is where things like EDI come into play. So purchase orders, invoices, shipment notices, receiving advices. These are standardized messages that trading partners communicate from one another in relation to the exchange of goods and what the business intent is between them. So again, I'm looking to buy this. I need you to pay for it with this purchase order, and then I'm going to ship it to you according to the outlines provided in this structured shipment notice. And that's really where I think data sharing also has a long history of standardization, because EDI really has been around for many decades at this point. And if you're a significant retailer of a certain size, generally speaking, I think you're looking to get those transaction messages based on the EDI transaction sets. And so that means that you're getting those transaction messages really in the same standard and structure from every one of your suppliers, really. So that leads us to the third type of data in the supply chain that, again, a little bit newer, I think, in the grand scheme, but growing in importance, is what we call visibility event data. And what visibility event data does is it actually provides insights into individual process instances that occur into the supply chain. So what actually happened during this packing process on this day in this facility, or how many different types of physical shipments did we actually produce and carry out on this particular day in this facility? How many items were present during this particular cycle count in this retail store? So when we're talking about visibility event data, what we're getting into is a much more granular picture of the supply chain, because every event that we're producing with, say, a visibility event data structure is representative of an individual instance of a physical process that happened in the supply chain. And this is where the EPCIS standard comes into play. And what the EPCIS standard does is it provides a common language and structure for how visibility event data can be constructed. And it also provides the open API standardized interfaces to be able to capture, query, and then send this data from one trading partner to another. And really where it comes into play with exchanging very granular data about serialized objects from one trading partner to another is, again, really that same type of benefit that EDI is providing for a number of years now. It's being able to have that common language as a retailer from all of your suppliers, that if you happen to have some type of physical object that comes into your possession from one of your suppliers, and you need that type of granular serial level data from all your suppliers, it makes it so that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to interpret different types of data sets that come from all the different systems that your suppliers have. If everybody is speaking the same language when it comes to visibility event data, it really removes that friction being able to communicate the ongoings of serialized products in a much more seamless way. And again, that concept really isn't something that's new in the industry. Again, I already mentioned EDI has been doing it for quite some time, but it's, again, this new concept of being able to share that really granular process level data with serialized item identification in a standardized way that makes it really scalable for the entire industry.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff you just covered. Let me unpack a couple things. So the item portion, which is basically GDSN, that's typically at the item level. We call it the G10, Global Trade Identification Number.
Yep, item level, product level, yep.
And for the most part, EDI, and what's really ironic, I learned about EDI back in the early 80s when I was with P&G, we found out all of our purchase orders and invoices at Walmart were produced and delivered via fax machine. You probably don't even know what a fax machine is, but...
Well, actually, so funny story about Mike. Before I got like my first major technical sales or solution engineer role, I actually used to sell cars briefly. And I actually had to fax like all kinds of paperwork to insurance companies. So I had an unexpected bout with fax machines actually at one point in my life.
You can imagine P&G and Walmart, two great big companies, doing all this work on fax machines. It was hundreds of millions of dollars which were on fax machines. But anyway, right. That too, for the most part, and keep me honest here, for the most, that is at the G10 level as well. The global trade, basically, I'm going to say the UPC, that's technically right, but it's the item level. Now we're going to get into something called serialized G10s or SG10s,
yep.
Right? So if I've got this product that has a specific G10, I have 12 of them. I have 12 unique serial numbers that go to that, so I can identify each one individually. I'm assuming that GDSN, for the most part, doesn't consider serialized data. And I believe that most of the EDI transactions, they may, but do they transmit serialized data, or is it typically at the G10 level?
Yeah, I think generally it's at the G10 level. And sometimes, specifically, I think a lot of times for things like regulations, I think you're starting to see more and more of a more granular identification, but not necessarily, again, at that serialized level. So, for example, in the Food Safety Modernization Act Rule 204, one of the things that you have to be able to do is produce what's called the traceability lot code for the products that you're shipping and receiving, transforming, what have you. And to make sure that that number is globally unique for a particular batch, the lot code itself doesn't necessarily cut it. You have to have a combination of a product identifier and a lot level identifier as well. And the marrying of those two makes that identifier globally unique. So what you're seeing maybe on EDI going forward now in certain cases is perhaps an additional level identification at, say, that batch or lot level, which is distinguishing one group of the same product from another group of the same product, but not necessarily down to like the individual, say, like this case to this case to this case. Yeah.
And that's why I want to unpack EPCIS, because even at the lot level, I may have 50 items in a lot. I'm not uniquely identifying this product versus the one right next to it, right? So EPCIS, I believe, is the first platform from GS1 or anybody that allows me to transmit unique SG10, serialized G10s across the supply chain. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, no, I would say in the grand scheme, it really kind of is the first of its kind. It's really a language that was developed by supply chain partners to be able to transmit originally, certainly, information about uniquely identified items, and being able to also have that language to be able to, if you have, for example, a whole string of events related to a singular item, it's a way of being able to string that all together and being able to actually tell the full history of a unique item, really from manufacturing all the way to point of sale, which is, again, all the processes that the standard really supports in terms of being able to represent a particular process instance. It has all the business set values that allow you to basically represent, all those processes from start to finish. And again, like all the GS1 standards, it's something that's developed by a significant community of industry participants, brands, retailers, solution providers, all the member organizations in GS1 Global. It's really kind of the first of its kind in that scale. Yeah.
Got it. God, don't share anything that's confidential, but do we have any examples in the industry where people are using EPCIS across the supply chain, specifically with different trading partners? Okay, because there's a lot of verticals that are leveraging it up and down, may not use EPCIS for that because people who make the products, like a Nike, are the same people who sell it in a store, which is the Nike stores, right? But I'm thinking across retailers to suppliers. Do we have any good examples where EPCIS is being used to transmit that, serialized data?
Yeah, no, and so I think kind of expanding maybe beyond the retail side of things, I think EPCIS is actually firmly in place and being explored pretty considerably in a lot of our verticals that we support. So I think one of the main examples that we have today certainly is in the pharmaceutical world. So you have all the key players from the pharmaceutical manufacturers to the big distributors and the dispensers. They have a need to share serialized data across the supply chain for the change of ownership of pharmaceutical products. And that's in response to the data requirements laid out in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. And so what they've done is they've actually chosen EPCIS as the standard to construct those documents that they transmit from, again, manufacturer all the way down to distributor. And you really see a very significant implementation of the standard in that realm. On the food side, one of the things that we're doing actively here at GS1 US is talking about EPCIS as a data sharing means and a data capture means and a data representation means for the critical tracking events required by the FISM 204 rule. And so you see a number of solution providers in that space implementing the standard as part of their framework. And I think a really good example of that is there's a constituent of people involved in the seafood world called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. And it's a collection of grocery retailers, seafood providers and producers, and solution providers as well that have kind of all come together and said that we're going to capture critical tracking events in a unified format. And they've chosen actually EPCIS as the bedrock for that effort as well. And then again, in the retail world, we did kind of talk about implementations in the store. You do see some solutions out there that use EPCIS kind of as the bedrock of those platforms. And you see a lot of some key store implementations, I think, today that leverage the standard there. And then there are a number of retailers as well that are starting to explore it a little bit more deeply for that usage of claims compliance. So being able to verify outbound and inbound from supplier to retailer, and then see if you can leverage that data to get to the bottom of why there is a shipping discrepancy.
Yep.
Wiliot's visibility platform connects the digital and physical worlds using IoT pixels, battery-free smart tags that push data to the cloud in real time without human intervention. Their mission is to make every single thing an agent of change, enabling ambient IoT by adding intelligence and automation to food, apparel, packaging, pharmaceuticals, and other products. Learn more at wiliot.com.
Yeah, I'm gonna transition for a second to something that actually happened in 2018, believe it or not. 2018, 2019, kind of pre-COVID, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Auburn University did a very extensive study. I was very actively involved with it and really thought it was tremendous work. It was called the CHIP project. Mm-hmm. And for the life of me, I can't remember what CHIP meant. It meant something. I think they just came up with the word CHIP and then found an acronym to match it. But anyway, there was a graphic on that I had sent to you, and we'll put that up for the audience to see. But the CHIP business group talked about pain points that are primarily between a retailer and the supplier of products to that retailer. And it created kind of three buckets of real issues between them. Number one, as you just mentioned, claims. And claims is really a nice way of saying, I ordered 100 shirts. I only got 75 shirts. The 25 shirts that I got shorted, I'm going to claim back to you and say, I didn't get those. And then you go, well, I shipped all 100. Well, I didn't get them. Well, I shipped them, and we did that back and forth again. But that whole process results in, obviously, claims. The second one is, and I think the pharmaceutical example is a real example of that, is counterfeit product. I mean, it doesn't take much to replicate the Nike swoosh. I mean, Nike spends millions of dollars on the artwork and the marketing of that Nike swoosh, but I can, with a printing press that creates that overnight, and sell it for half the amount of money and take business away. That's counterfeit, right? So we ought to be able to leverage the serialized data to go, here's all the legitimate Nike items. If you don't get an SG10 that's one of these, then it's counterfeit. And the last one was shrink. Shrink is basically defined as unaccounted for inventory. I should think I have it, but I can't find it anywhere. Well, at the time, and the numbers are probably updated since this, but that was $181 billion with just being able to figure out, we can't measure those things today. So how do we go and do that? So let's just go through the claims example. Okay.
Sure.
You're Hanes, I'm Walmart. I order 150 pairs of underwear. You ship me 150 pairs of underwear. I get them and go, I only got 100. I'm claiming 50.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that? If you're Hanes, what do you do? How do you react? You say, okay, well, fine, just pay me for the 100? Or do you kind of get your back up a little bit, go, no, I shipped you 150. I expect to be paid for 150, right?
Right.
So that is today done without any proof, without any data. Well, now if I've got every one of my items has an RFID tag, has a serialized G10 on it, and I know I put these in the box and they're going to Walmart, I now have all those SG10s, right? How in the world do I use this platform to transport that to Walmart to go, on this shipment, all 150 SG10s are right here. So when you receive them, you'll receive the same 150 we sent. We're not taking any claims. Is EPCIS built to be able to do that kind of data transfer? Because that's a lot of data.
Yeah, no, and I think the transfer of data is still one of the main things that is kind of one of the more, I would say, complex parts of the equation, because there's a number of different ways that you could transmit the data, a number of different technologies, and they each have their pros and cons. You've got blockchain, you've got cloud database storage, and accessing a server with
let me stop here a second. So EPCIS is basically just the format.
Correct.
Okay, great. So it's not a system. I can't buy a EPCIS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's worth level setting on, exactly, too. Yeah. So it's a standard that kind of like describes the framework for, say, visibility systems, but it's not something that you would say like download and install with an executable, things of that nature. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So walk me through that. If I'm a retailer and I want to start to share via EPCIS with all of my suppliers, and I say, I want you, when you put the product in the box, to send me the SG10s of that through EPCIS. What exactly do I need? Obviously, there's a standards there. What are the pieces of the puzzle I need, including the transport mechanism, to be able to do that?
Yeah, no, definitely. So the way that you go about producing event data with EPCIS is you start with the structure that the standard defines for building the event data itself. And so events in EPCIS are defined really by 4 key dimensions. You have the what, the where, the when, and the why. So the what is going to be, what objects are we handling in this instance of this process that we're using the standard to represent in that event. And so these are kind of, as we already alluded to, if it's serialized products, it's going to be serialized G10. So G10 plus serial number, that identity encoded either in, say, RFID tag or a 2D barcode. Mm-hmm. So those are the objects that we're handling in the event. And then you have things like the when dimension, which is just simply when is this process taking place, this instance of this process occurring. Then you have the where dimension, which there's this notion of a read point. So where exactly were the products handled during the capturing of this process? And then there's also a secondary element as well called the business location, which is now that process instance is complete, where are the objects in that what dimension field now, where can they now be found essentially? Is where can they be now found until another event changes their location perhaps? And then you have that why element, which is, say, your business step. So in this event that we're creating, is this an instance of a shipping process, a receiving process, a packing process, a selling process, a cycle counting process? There's really a pretty significant list of supported processes that the standard has in its vocabulary. And then you have also a notion of status. So are the items that we list, are those SG10s now in transit? Are they out of a sellable inventory status? Things of that nature. And then you also have the ability to link transaction documents as well to a physical process also. So if you are taking SG10s and putting them into a shipping carton in response to, say, a purchase order, in the event data, you can actually have a link in the standard data to that purchase order. So it kind of marries the physical with the transactional, if you will. But really what you do to build EPCIS event data is you start off with what types of processes are you looking to get that visibility into? So are you looking to get more granular details on the packing process, on the picking process, on the loading of a truck, that process? Where are we trying to get this extra information from? Or what processes are we looking to get more insights into down to that level? And then once you have that defined, you really have to then consider how are you going to capture those identities of the products that you're handling. So if they're SG-10s, really the main two ways that I think about capturing those are either scanning it out of the chip of an RFID tag, or if you're scanning barcodes, you're going to want to have a barcode data carrier that supports handling and encoding both the G10 and the serial number. And that's where things like the QR code with, say, GS1 Digital Link come into play. So once you've established the ways that you're going to then capture the identities of the objects that you're handling, those serialized identities, then you have to have basically like an interface or an API that collects all those identities from the scans that you're doing. And really that's where EPCIS-based systems are kind of designed to live, is sort of right on top of the inventory. And so once you have the ways defined to then ingest into the system those serialized identities, and also, again, build those workflows that define the business steps, timestamp the events as they get created, it's then using that interface to build the event data based on the EPCIS standard and that structure that the standard defines, and then essentially publishing or committing that event then to some type of persistent storage mechanism. The standard uses the term EPCIS repository quite frequently in that regard. And then from there, you have a number of different ways that the standard envisions that serialized data could flow from one partner to another. So you could very well just simply send it along with the goods. So as soon as the goods ship, you could send the event data at that serial level as well. Or there's also this notion of once you come into possession of a serialized object and you need that granular data on it, you could actually query back upstream to the party that provided that data. So this could be either say like a retailer asking a manufacturer for the production level event data to kind of say where it came from. That could be for meeting a regulation or getting sustainability data related data. Or if it's, say, like a logistic unit, like you're looking to understand better, this logistic unit, I was told was going to have this many products, but it actually had this many when I did my physical verification when it arrived. The upstream party, say the distributor to the retailer, you could say, to the distributor, can you send me the visibility event data for how you actually constructed this pallet and what SG-10s you actually said were committed onto that pallet? So that's really where I think you have the consideration of different, exchange technologies like blockchain or various API structures that you can consider. But really what the standard defines is how to build that data in a way that is, interpretable from one trading partner to another. Again, kind of in that same way that EDI does. And it kind of defines like the various ways that you could share that data. You could either do a push or you could do an upstream request for it in that manner as well.
Okay. So I have an example, and this is going to be a little bit technical, but I think it's really important that what you just said, we have an actual visual example of it. And by the way, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Sure.
So this is an example.
Yeah, here we go. Yep.
Buyer that has reacted to an order and said, okay, this particular person ordered 5 pairs of underwear. Okay.
Yep.
Put them all in a box. Walk me very quickly and high level, because we don't go into all the detail, but what is it? This tells me something. If I receive this, what does this tell me? So for example, parent ID is SSCC, a whole bunch of numbers. What is that?
Yep.
What does that mean?
Yep. Yeah. So basically what we're looking at here is this is an EPCIS event, really, is what it is.
Yep.
And what this essentially does is it represents an instance of a packing process. So that's why, before we get into, say, parent ID, that's why a couple steps below that, in that biz step field, you see packing. So that kind of defines that this is an instance of a packing process that occurred at the location that's in the read point, basically. But yeah, so what you have for the object identifiers here is that parent ID is representative of the logistic unit that those child cases were said to be packed into. So the SSCC is the serialized shipment container code. That's the GS1 identification key for a logistic unit. And that parent ID contains the...
Matt, hang on. So that's the carton. That's the literal...
Yes, the carton, yeah.
So the physical carton, we sometimes call it the case level. That That actually gives a number to the carton.
Correct.
So if I don't read all of the children that are in the carton, this transaction tells me that these items are in that carton, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So what this is basically suggesting, because it's supposed to be capturing the physical instance of that packing process for this logistic unit, this says that each of those child EPCs, which could be those RFID tagged packs of underwear, let's say, this is the physical representation of the construction of this carton, and it suggests that all five, what is it? Yeah, is it five? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, each of those uniquely identified packs of underwear should have been in this case based on this event data.
So let's walk through this backward. You're Hanes and I'm Walmart. Hey, Matt, I'm going to claim 2 pairs of underwear because I didn't get them. I got the case, but I only got 3 pair of underwear. I didn't get 2 of them, so I'm going to claim against that. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so if I'm Hanes and you're claiming, say, that I only sent 3, well, what I can then show with this physical event data is that I actually did verify, as I put together this carton, that I did in fact scan those 5 promised units into them, and here's their identities. So what I can do with that is I can say, all right, if I know that my packing process was legitimate and that I actually scanned the unique units into this logistic unit, from there that says that, okay, my packing process seemed like it was solid. Now I can start to look elsewhere to see where do those go missing? Did they go missing in transit? Did they go missing in the staging area? It kind of just starts you off with legitimate data that says I packed them, but somewhere along the line they're now gone. Yeah,
absolutely. I hear that very strongly, industry. That's important. What I'm doing is verifying these 5 unique serial numbers, not just 5 pairs of a UPC or a G1014. 5 unique serial numbers got put in a case, got sealed, got put on the truck, got received by the retailer, and if they're pushing back, going, I only got 3 of them, I'm claiming it. You go, well, here's the 5 unique serial numbers. Do you have these 5 in your system? Yeah, we have them in our system, but you know what? We know we got shorted. No, time out. These are unique by definition. You have them. You did receive them. I'm not paying you $1. That's the power of this thing. I now have actual data to refute potential claims. I think this is huge. Absolutely huge. So now that I've slowed you down, okay, but I still get this. I still have to get this data to the retailer. And the only way I have to do that today is through some electronic data interchange. And I don't hear you saying that. So realistically, between a big retailer and a big supplier, or even a small one, how do I transport this data? So you've given me the standard of how to format data. How do I get this? Because this data has to arrive before the truck arrives. Because on the retail, they're going to read that and go, I got everything or I didn't get everything, right? So how do I get that data to them ahead of time?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question, Mike. And I think these sharing choreographies with this type of serialized data is something that is still being worked out, I think, by the industry. But I think what the standard does offer is similar ways that people might have exchanged data already, like kind of as you mentioned with EDI. You could very easily just push this serial level data for everything that you ship. You could very well do that.
Sure.
But there's also this notion with EPCIS of repository to repository communication. And what that really involves, especially now, I think, with the evolution of the standard to support the JSON structure and REST API architecture, which is really the prevailing way that a lot of modern web-based solutions are designed. I think you have this notion of using API structures with EPCIS going forward in the future. And what that looks like is if I have perhaps an object in my possession and I need to get some type of granular serial level event data for it. I could, with my trading partner, organize a way that I could get access to an endpoint, and with the endpoint that I then have access to and credentials for as well. There's the credential aspect to it also. But if I happen to have a serialized identifier that will serve as one of the query parameters for that event data, I could then ask that upstream repository from my trading partner for the visibility of that data that we've agreed to transmit between each other. So I think in the past, I think a lot of supply chain data in relation to physical objects with EDI, that's been always kind of like a downstream push. But with EPCIS, there also is this notion of not just the downstream push. Again, that certainly is a choreography that could exist, but there's really this notion of upstream querying to repositories. And so that's what really the query API or the query interface provides. And then you send that via some type of web-based API connection to the downstream party's repository. And it's that sort of pull mechanism of sharing the data is something that the standard also envisions.
Got it.
BOP's collaborative inventory intelligence technology is helping many retailers and CPGs such as Colgate-Palmolive, PepsiCo, Coty, and Duracell avoid lost sales, markdowns, and spoilage by streamlining their next-gen collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment process. Learn more at bops.ai.
So back in 2018, when we were doing this, everybody was excited about this thing called blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
You're describing a different way of doing it. So what is the status of blockchain? Is it still a viable option for, I know there's lots of blockchains for cryptocurrency and all kinds of stuff like that, but when it comes to the retail supply chain, do you see blockchain today playing a really important role in transmitting this data across different trading partners? And if the answer is no, do you see it in the future still being a viable option?
Yeah, and again, I think that's a really awesome question, Mike, for the industry, certainly. And I have to admit, I'm not personally a blockchain expert, but I would say that I think with any technology that is trying to serve this purpose of, I would say, persistent storage and also data exchange and some type of significant level of data exchange, I think it certainly is a technology that is worth considering in the conversations. And I think with any technology, there are certainly pros and cons to its implementation as far as energy, perhaps the level of effort used to publish to the blockchain, things of that nature. Really, I think with anything, there's pros and cons. But I think the main thing to consider with this type of data is that anytime an object comes into the possession of a party, the events that they generate for that and for their location should only be generated by them. And then you really, I think, have to make sure that you have a really strong history for all the serialized items in the supply chain. You have to have that integrity of the data, meaning that only the people that come into physical possession of those objects should be producing events. And then the publishing of those events to whatever data storage it is should be persistent. And then it should have a secure way of exchanging the data. So I think blockchain and a lot of other methods are all really well qualified to handle that. It's just, what are the pros and cons of using each, I think, is the long-term considerations.
It's kind of like EDI. I mean, there's a number of ways to transport EDI data. You can dial in and pick it up. You can push it. Lots of different ways to do it. What you guys are just articulating is these are the standards. These are the ways you want to do it in a consistent format, so you don't have individual Hanes and Walmart coming up with their own standard, and then Walmart and Fruit of the Loom coming up with a different standard, because that's just not tenable.
Yep. Okay. Yep, exactly. It's really, for us, it's really being able to provide that common language of sharing information about serialized items for those processed instances that they go through. So it removes the friction, again, really kind of in the way that EDI has for the transaction side. Yeah.
So I'm sure we've piqued some interest. I'm sure we've confused some people. Resources are available from GS1 if people want to double click into this for their particular use case. Are there resources available at GS1 or with you or somebody that will help guide them through this process?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Mike. So I think some of the main ones maybe to consider first would be the standard site on the GS1 global website, so gs1.org. And there you can find the standard documents. You have EPCIS, which kind of defines the event structure in those standard API interfaces that we mentioned. You then also have what's called the companion standard to it, the core business vocabulary, and all of the ways that you can format the identifiers for objects and locations, whether that's traditional EPCORN formatting or the newer digital link formatting, which the new version of the standard now supports. It defines all of that and provides, again, all of the values for things like the business process values and the disposition or status values as well. And then there's also the EPCIS and CBV implementation guidelines, which kind of goes through sort of that high-level process that we talked about earlier of how do you go from just a general description of a physical process and representing that process with the standard. And it also describes those data sharing choreographies that we went over in a bit more of a higher level and a bit some detail also. And then what we have, for example, on the the GS1 US school site, gs1us.org, is for different applications, you have guidelines for applying the standard for a number of different use cases. So if you're looking to apply the standard for, again, say the use case of producing the change of ownership documentation for DSCSA, we have guidelines for that. If you're looking to leverage the standard for producing physical event data in relation to the critical tracking events that you need for FSMA 204 for those critical tracking events, we actually have a document published for that. It's an addendum to our greater implementation of the GS1 standards guideline for FSMA 204. And all of those examples follow the latest version of the standard, EPCIS 2.0. And then for the apparel side of things, again, we've actually been talking a lot about the claims compliance issue. One of the things that GS1 US published and is actually updated very recently as well is a guideline about leveraging RFID technology for the claims compliance issue, specifically for the apparel use case. And in that document, what you'll find is a lot of really solid examples and graphics about how to use RFID and scanning RFID to capture that serial level data. And then we actually have examples that were updated to the new version of the EPCIS standard that show what that data would actually look like.
Got it. Matt, you are a plethora. I learned that word the other day. Plethora. You're a plethora. That means a lot. You're very, very knowledgeable, and I really do appreciate the time you spent. I guess one closing comment is, what questions did I not ask that I should have? What's on your mind that you want to kind of share with the industry that I never even brought up? Any of that or any other closing comments that you have?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that and we certainly here at GS1 US, I think, are very involved with, obviously, is the evolution of the barcode, moving from, say, like the 1D to the 2D. And I know that you will have more conversations with us about Sunrise 2027, where eventually you'll have all the systems needed as far as scanning and processing, and then the actual marking of products with 2D barcodes, where it'll get to the point where you actually don't need, say, the UPC on the product from that point forward. You can do point of sale transactions and consumer engagement all with a single barcode. Doesn't mean that the UPC is going obsolete. In fact, that's not the case, but it just really means that eventually you'll be able to do it all with 2D barcode. But I think what's interesting in regards to the 2D barcode is I'm looking forward to seeing more of a marrying of the RFID data carrier and the barcode data carrier. And that's really where 2D is starting to bridge that gap. Because again, I think as we mentioned, if you're going to leverage a barcode for serialized product capture or in processes, you really need to be able to have a data carrier that's capable of containing the G10 and that serial number in a size that's not too astronomical. Mm-hmm. So really what you have with RFID and 2D barcode is a perfect blending and marrying of data carriers that can contain that serialized identifier. And that allows you to leverage that serial identifier in a variety of different processes. So again, some of the things that we talked about with RFID, because you're able to use it in that non-line of sight fashion, you can scan it, store-wide to perform cycle counts, scan, say, like all the cartons that are coming in that are full of RFID tag products in the receiving process. But where you're handling, singular items at a time, such as at the point of sale, the 2D barcode can really kind of fulfill the way that you can perform serialized sales transactions. And I think that unlocks, just so much for the retail environment. So for example, if I come up to the register and at the register, I'm able to actually log which of those SG items I'm selling. If I have, say, EPCIS event data that suggests that the one I'm selling was most previously in the back of house versus the front of house because of that location-based nature that physical event data gives me, what I can do is I could actually sell that item. And then in another view of, say, my stockroom versus my sales floor, I can know exactly where that item was sold from, where it was most previously read. And that means that if it was sold from the sales floor, that's perhaps my last one. I could actually get real-time insights into, I now have a gap on my sales floor and I need to move more product out to make my offering, as maximally available to the consumer as I can have it. And I think that really lends itself well to additional use cases that might not have been possible before. And I think returns fraud is a really, really fascinating one. So if you're, say, retailer A, I'm retailer B, and we happen to have some level of common product offering, like let's say we both sell brand A and brand B simultaneously in our stores. If there's a bad actor out there that, say, stole an instance of a product from you, and I also happen to sell that same product, I could make an attempt to try to return that product to me when I never actually bought, when that person actually never bought that instance of that product from me. And so if I actually have that serialized data record of all the SG10s that I'm selling, I could actually say, well, sir, or madam, whoever you might be, I do actually offer this product to my consumers, but I didn't sell you this one because I don't have that physical event data that suggests that particular instance of that product, I didn't sell that to you. So I think with having serial level data and being able to marry, say, the RFID tag to the 2D barcode going forward, I think there's just such an extraordinary amount of opportunity for the industry to leverage these two data carriers simultaneously for all these different processes. And I'm really excited to see where it goes from here.
So this afternoon, I'm having another podcast with a guy by the name of Joe Cole. I don't know if you know Joe. Joe is the vice president of asset protection at Macy's, and he is leading the industry, in my opinion, about leveraging RFID for asset protection uses. But he's still, I believe, and I'll find out this afternoon, I still believe he's capturing transactions at the register at the G10 level and things leaving the store at the SG10 level, which is okay, except I sold 5 pairs of jeans and 10 left the store. Half of them got stolen. Which ones got stolen? I don't know.
Right.
Because it that way, right? So that is a huge opportunity. And so one of two things. Number one, we got to either figure out how to, via RFID, capture that SG10 at the register, or two, use a 2D barcode. And I think you're absolutely right. Man, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate your wisdom. We'll put all of those links to the GS1 resources in the body of the actual YouTube video that we're going to put out here and publish it on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your time. Very, very informative. And if you've got any other questions for Matt, I'm sure that you'd be able to get a hold of him via GS1. All right. Matt, anything closing?
No, I think we've covered certainly a lot of ground here, and I think there's a lot of subjects that we can continue to talk about in terms of having that serial level data and what can that really unlock. I think we've really scratched on maybe just a small part of it. Really, I think it's a new frontier for supply chain participants and brands and retailers alike. And I think there's a lot more we could discuss. And should I be given the opportunity, I'd be happy to return to go over those even further too.
Love that. Love that. Matt, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. And for those of you listening to the podcast, we do have 2 more with GS1. One is we've got one coming up with Jonathan Gregory talking about Tag Data Standards 2.0, so extended attributes in an RFID tag. And then you already mentioned it. We're gonna spend some time the podcast after that talking with Gina Morgan regarding the Sunrise 2027. I used to call it Sunset, and she slapped my hand. She said, "Mike, we're not sunsetting anything." Okay, fair enough. So, Matt, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Mike. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.